Thank you very much for coming. My name is Brad Lewis. For those of you that don't know, I'm just going to talk about getting a film made today because I've had sort of a relatively long history in getting movies made in the animated space. I produced the movie Ants, Ratatouille. I co-directed Cars 2. I produced Storks, and I executive produced Lego Batman, and I'm currently producing How to Train Your Dragon 3 at DreamWorks. So it's sort of a kind of a it's been sort of a vast career, being a part of starting the DreamWorks animation process with PDI back in the 90s with Jeffrey Katzenberg and Steven Spielberg, and then going on to Pixar for 10 years, and then to Warner Brothers. It's been a great process of learning the way different studios and different people approach animated filmmaking as far as their approach to it, not my approach to it. It's been a sort of a developing learning curve. So just to kick in real quick, what does a producer do? A producer gets a movie made. At the end of the day, once you've signed up for a project, and once you've evaluated the people that are involved with it, and you decide that you want to do it, then you get it made. You're the only person, at least for me, in my contract that says I deliver a movie for a certain amount of money on a certain date. So come hell or high water, I'll get the movie made. So what does it practically mean? Practically, it means that we either create a product ourselves that we sell to a studio or to somebody that's going to finance our movie. We buy a property of some sort, and then we get that developed into something creative, and then we sell it to somebody that will finance it, distribute it. Or we'll convince somebody to assign us to a product that they've already developed, which has happened to me on a couple of occasions with the studios. They've developed the creative idea, and then they ask me to come in and basically lead that project to completion. I've been involved with every type of director that is been in animation. I've directed myself, and that's sort of its own experience and perspective. I've dealt with directors that have never directed before, never directed anything, not to mention a feature film. Those have come from the world of animation, never directed. Those have come from live action and never directed. And so it's always a process when I'm producing is getting to know who that director is. So once I'm assigned to a project, whoops, I'm going backwards. What I try to do actually before I commit is I look at all the key relationships. The financiers and distributors typically, in my case, have been studios. But remember, no matter what, you can call them a financier and you can call them a distributor, but they're people at the end of the day. And they're a relationship that I'm going to have some sort of a direct report to. And I have to be convinced prior to joining a project that I've got a strong enough relationship with that person that we're going to go on this journey together, because the journey is going to get super rocky. You know, these movies typically take 3.5 to 4 years. Ratatouille took me 5.5 years to produce. And you can imagine the trials and tribulations that take place. So I want to make sure that when the financiers and distributors get shaky about the product, and because we're going to be in story process almost the entire time, that I've got some sort of a connection with them, that I feel like I have hope and optimism that we can work together through super rocky times. And when it comes to a director, it's the same thing for me. If I'm going to work with a director, I need to get to know who they are. I need to know what their aspirations are, what's influenced them, how they feel about the movie. Do they have the movie in their heart and soul? Because you can tell a story different ways, but you can't change a director's heart and soul. So if they have the truth of the movie inside of them, then I believe I can get that movie made. So I always check in with the director, and I figure out what are they made of? What do they want to do? What's the art that is deep in their heart? What's the truth that they see in the movie? And if they have that, then I have the confidence I can make a movie with them, no matter what the trail. The key crew is the same thing. In certain cases, I've worked with crew over the years on several different projects together. And that's always my favorite thing, because I know what to expect from them. They know how I communicate. I know how they communicate. Because artists communicate in all sorts of different ways. All of us do. And we have our strengths and our weaknesses. But if I have some key relationships and key crew, then I'm a little bit more confident that I can also pull off that movie, and they'll ride with me on this bumpy road, which is, I guess, the refrain of this. And then who's the audience going to be? I'm also involved in some freelance projects. Right now, I'm involved in one with a large social media company. I'm not sure I understand the audience, to be honest with you, when it comes to animated content storytelling as it pertains to social media. Because it's a vast audience. I mean, in the case of someone like a Facebook, they've got like 1.7 billion users. That's a crazy large audience. But, you know, they're getting content through this. I've been used to making 3-act, 90-minute stories on a big screen. So how do we start to tell stories on the content of a small screen, and what does that really mean? What's an audience? You know, if all of you are separately connected to something that I'm going to be a part of creating, I have to understand how you're going to relate to it. But on a larger scale, I have to make sure that the idea that I'm going to be working on is appealing. At the end of the day, we have an obligation to put out appealing art. Otherwise, why are we in it? So if you're going to get a movie made, my advice is you sort of take in all of these things, a 360-degree look at it, and look at their talent, look at their objectivity, look at their emotional disposition, because despite what anybody says, you can break this down to process, you can break this down to its components. Animation is construction by deconstruction, right? It's not a spontaneous art. So it becomes management of emotions while we're creating, while we all have this sort of mutual aspiration. And you sort of objectively and subjectively take a look at that, and if you decide that you've got that makeup for success, that you can make it, then you do. And by the way, as an aside, there's no right answer to the right emotional disposition. You may decide half your crew is crazy, but that might be a really good thing. If they're crazy artists, that's fantastic, because I don't want everybody to be well-behaved. I don't want everybody to know how to act. I don't want everybody to know how to be on time. I don't want everybody to know how to finish on time. I just want great artists that are super dedicated to that. Getting them through the process is my problem, not their problem. Sorry. So at this point, for me, I commit. Again, part of this is how do you get it made? The only way I will get it made is if I've sort of taken a look at all those things, and then I commit. So if you're committed, then you're just going to make it happen. Doesn't matter, you're going to make it happen if you've done that analysis. And now, it completely changes. You are now responsible 100% to all those people that you just went through and sort of analyzed. You're 100% responsible to your financiers and distributors and their prism on the process and what they want to get out of it and what their needs and desires and fears are. You're 100% committed to your director. The director's story is the only story you can be telling. You might have great ideas about how to tell your story. 100% you have to line up on the director's vision, even when he's wrong. The sooner you line up on your director's vision and he gets it wrong, that's good news. Because now you know you're not making the right movie, and now you can change. If everybody fights the director's vision, or they have their own movie in their mind, then you start making sort of an amalgamation of different people's ideas, and you never really know if the director has in their heart and soul what it takes to finish that project. So it's 100% the director's vision, and your job is to find it for them. Whatever they're bad at, you prop them up. Whatever they're great at, you exploit it. All things will come into doubt on all of these relationships that you analyze. All of them will come into doubt. They will come to doubt you as you're getting the film made. You will come to doubt them as you're making the film. It's just human nature. And then along the way, if you're the producer to me is the production leader, period. You will make changes, maybe wholesale changes, maybe no changes, but you have to be prepared to make them if it's not working, on some level if it's not working. And not everybody's successful in a given project. But if you're honest with your aspiration to start up front, if you're honest with your analysis of their talent, if you're honest with how they're performing while the movie is going on, and then whether it's failing or succeeding, you're honest about that, That's all you can do. And you owe it, it's your responsibility to them to give them good or bad news. Wow. Is that next? Okay, so alignment. This is something that I sort of am fascinated by. If we all did a project together, we would be 100% aligned on what the goal was. And financiers and distributors, we know what they want. They want to make money at the end of the day, right? So they're going to give a bunch of money to it. They're going to trust us through the process on some level, or we'll make them trust us, and then they want to make money. That's great. So we know what they want, and that's great. When an audience sits down, so when they sit down to watch your movie, all they want to do is be entertained. Have you ever gone to a movie and sat down and go, I hope I hate this? It just doesn't happen, right? You sit down and you go, all right, I'm going to give, it's a gift that we get. They're going to give us 90 minutes of their hard-earned time, money, families, relationships, and they're going to go sit down and watch it. So we owe it to them not to ruin 90 minutes by telling a moderately interesting story. Moderately interesting stories are the death of our business, really. We need to be edgy. We need to surprise them with wonder. And also, when a crew agrees to work on your project, you have to understand as a producer or a director that they're giving you their heart and soul for the next, in the case, most of my movies are 3 or 4 years. If you make a big decision on a movie and you make a last-minute change or something and they're going to work 6 weekends in a row, then it better be the right decision. It's not that you will never make that decision, but if you make decisions like that continually on a project, you work people overtime, you work them on Saturdays and Sundays, then it's not respectful of who they are. It's not respectful of their time unless you're on the road to making something truly great and it's for really, really important reasons. So try always to be respectful of their time and respectful of, I never want an artist to work for a week or two and then have no idea whether or not they made an impact on the movie. And in animation, things are so compartmentalized. There's somebody that might be modeling a bolt on a beam or something. Well, if that bolt on a beam is going to be in shadow in one shot, then don't make it. Just throw it in shadow. We could do something 2D quick. Don't let them spend days and days and days working on something that's never going to see the light of day. Again, so that's sort of be respectful of the risk that everybody's taking together. This is all, when you're making a movie, it's all on your shoulders. It's all on your shoulders. Everybody's taking a risk, work that's necessary, and at the end of the day, respect the fact that you're trying to make art. Whenever you've been inspired by poetry, you've been inspired by a painting, you've been inspired by a song, you've been inspired by a movie, you've been inspired by animation, it's a sacred thing that we're attempting to do. It's a sacred thing that we're trying to do. So always be respectful that we're trying to make something that is aspirational. It's going to bring people out of their chairs. A quick thing about money. So I know Scott last night, he's like going, oh, be realistic, you got to make money. And I'm like, yeah, but at the end of the day, money can't drive it. We need it's commercial business for many of us, right? We need to make enough money so we can make a comfortable living, so we can support our families, and the people on the crew can do that. But remember, money can kill art. Money is conservative and safe. The more money a project makes, the more conservative and safe people are that putting up the money. And I think in the business, I think it's trending more and more conservative. There's a reason why there's been so many superhero movies over the last 10 years. There's a reason why animated movies are in sequel land all the time. It's mostly because the money that's behind those, they don't want to take a risk on a brand new, original concept because they might not make their money back. But I don't begrudge them that instinct. I mean, if anybody in this room had $50 million, if I gave it to you today, would you go out tomorrow and make an animated movie for $50 million? Probably not. So, I mean, right away, I can empathize with people that are putting up the money for it. It's a big risk. Certainly, it's their business, and it's a hits business, and they're going to do 10 or 15, and when one gets really big, they'll make their money back. So I understand it's not that simple. But at the same time, I really respect the fact that they are entering into the art space with a lot of money. Money thinks it's smart. And when I say money, I'm just using money like, I could use it like honey, like somebody out there paying for it. But money can convince themselves they're smarter about the art than you are as an artist, than you are as a producer, than you as a filmmaker. It's a tough thing. There's more and more MBAs that are now learning about the filmmaking business, about animation, about social media, and they're coming out with ideas of, gosh, I think I know how to entrepreneur in your business. I think I can put money into this. I think I know what your commodity is, and I think I can make money off of it. It's not that easy. The metrics and analysis that are available at some of the larger studios I've worked at, they are ridiculous, the amount of analysis, things that go through. I mean, you guys would, for those of you that haven't worked at a larger studio, you would be surprised at how many people are doing 8,000 different analytics on the process of making a movie. And in my opinion, when you have a strong team, when you have a strong producer, a lot of that isn't necessary, and it doesn't make the movie better. It just gives you more analytics. But it can fool people into thinking they know how your movie's going. It's like, I know how it's going because I've looked at charts and graphs, and you've not met your quota in animation for the last 3 weeks. Therefore, things must be going wrong. What if that animation was so hard and so amazing that you're a little bit behind, but you know where you're going to catch up because you have some easier shots coming down the road? You have to trust in the process. Analytics doesn't make a movie, but it can make you feel super smart. The other thing is, if you have a bad screening, we do where we make story reels of the whole movie, and we'll do this about 4 to 8 times over the process of 3 to 4 years. Storyboards, put onto video with voices and visual effects, or excuse me, just effects, sound effects, and we will put up the whole movie, and we'll analyze if the story's working. Invariably, 1 or 2 or 3 of those screenings are going to be awful. I mean, literally, you're going to watch the whole thing and you're going to be like, it's not inspiring, it's not art, it's not interesting, it's not funny. When that happens, it can attract the money folks to say, oh, we're in trouble, we're never going to make it out of here. So, again, managing these guys is super important. So you need to understand where they're coming from. You get their prism. You do need to respect them because they're in our business, and without them, we wouldn't be able to do these great things that we can do. Oftentimes, so you have to help manage their expectations, give them all the information you have from your vantage point, your experience. Make sure they understand where you are in the process, how it's going to get better. You do have to explain. You have to be patient with them. You need to listen to their concerns, and then you have to learn what to ignore. It's too brazen to say just ignore them, right? They're just the money, fuck it, they don't know what they're doing. You know. You do need to listen to them. They may have concerns that are meaningful, but at the same time, many of their concerns are not going to be concerns that you need to pass on to your crew or to pass on to your creatives, because it doesn't make the artistic process any better. In fact, it may squeeze the artistic process as people start to feel pressure. If it's one of my movies, I feel the pressure, and I don't want the crew to feel the pressure. And ultimately, we have to be held accountable. We have to come in on budget, but that's easy. So that's my thing about money. So creative, there's in larger animated products, there is a well-known process. There's a process in the storytelling, sort of a 3-act storytelling process. You heard last night Scott talk about Joseph Campbell. Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. This has been around for 25, 30 years as one of the core components. Save the Cat, core storytelling authors that have learned how to do storytelling. They break it down into components. We've got largely the same process is used in animation, where you're trying to create something spontaneous, but you start with a script, you go to storyboard, eventually you're going to do some animation of some sort, then you're going to sort of colorize it or light it, add effects, and then put all the music together. So it's a very similar process. But all of these ways that we look at art and we break it down to sort of tell us where are we in the process, where should we expect to be in the process, and how are we going to make this in animation, can be a huge false sense of security, because it makes it feel like you know what you're doing because you have the right structure. But structure and artists who obey structure are not always your friend. There's a false sense of security. For me, it makes me more nervous when we're on schedule than when we're not on schedule. Joe Ranft, who I worked with at Pixar, his big thing in story was just trust the process. So we sort of have all these things happening. Everything's going to be all over the place, but just trust the process. Trust the fact that you're talented. Trust the fact that you have talented people working with you. Trust the fact that everybody wants to do something different to surprise those people that sit in the theater, and trust you'll work it through. One big question that I get a lot is, how do you measure creative progress? When you're putting up reels, 90-minute story reels, and you're doing this over the course of 3 years to 4 years, and you've seen it 8 times, and you start to get tunnel vision, jokes that you thought were funny 3 years ago, you doubt yourself, are they still funny? Is the audience still going to respond to them? When something hasn't been working, and you change the idea to try to fix it, what's the difference between creative progress, like you actually change something significantly in a way where the prism of the audience understands it better now, and so it's either funny or it's emotional or it's working. And oftentimes those things are things that were done earlier in the picture to set it up for that moment. But how do you know that something's better or it's just different? And the real answer is, we'll figure it out. A lot of times, you spin your wheels on trying a new idea for something that's not working and it's never going to work. But you seem like maybe you came up with something more clever. No, I can make this work because it's going to be more clever. It's going to be funnier. I'm going to write it better. I'm going to get a better performance from the actor. But in reality, it's just different. It doesn't fix the problem. So a lot of times with creative progress, we're going to look at it with a test audience, or you're going to show it to some of the people that haven't seen it for a while, and it starts to become obvious when you progress. When you see it play, you should know good art when you see it. Wow. All right. I went through this quickly before. So when I was talking about how to get a movie made, I did a thesaurus thing. I know this is super bright, kind of hard to read, right? Eyes adjust, pupils. But what was funny is two of the synonyms that came up was bound and fictitious. And at a super quick glance, when I think about producing and making a movie, some of these words started to jump out to me. So what's it mean to make a movie? It's like it says destined, right? And there's some point you do, from my standpoint, we're destined to finish a movie. We're destined to surround this idea and this director with great things. A lot of these things happen to me in the process of things. They're not all positive. They're not all, there's obligated. There's a sense of obligation. There's forced. There's no doubt sometimes you force things through. Enslaved. I'm sure a lot of people feel enslaved to the job in the process. I feel enslaved to it when I'm in the process. It's restrained. It's made under necessity. It's a necessity to make great art. Under compulsion. I think a lot of times if you're artistic, you feel a compulsion to make it. You can't not make the movie. When you really get onto a human emotion, you can't let it go until you nail it and you make somebody else feel that same emotion. But when I looked at fictitious, which came up, so made up comes up, a part about being made, I thought was, well, even those are equally interesting. It's dishonest. I suppose at times it can be a little dishonest in the process. It's improvised. It's simulated. It's make-believe. It is mythical. It's romantic. So a lot of these sort of interesting synonyms that came up with just the process of making something. And a lot of these are more human emotions down here that one goes through in the process. There's a slide I think I whisked by before, but I want to talk about the director super quick. The director's job is one of probably the toughest job in the business. In animation, on a big 3D animated movie, the director actually has to make every possible decision you can imagine. And oftentimes they're doing the writing of it, They're choosing what the execution is going to be of it. They're making all the story decisions. They're making all the modeling decisions, all the assets, all the things that are going to be made. They're overseeing all the animations decisions, all the lighting decisions, all the effects decisions. And I mean, a lot of you are familiar with animation, so I won't go into as much detail, but literally, if I was going to, as a director, choose a lecture place, and so it would be like, what are your seats going to be? Are they going to be, are they going to be cork? Are they going to be made in, are they going to be a regular seat? Like, you get nothing for free in animation. An animation director is making thousands and thousands of decisions. When I'm producing, my job is to work the director's process. In the case of Nick Stoller and Storks, he was a live-action director. He'd done Forgetting Sarah Marshall, Get Him to the Greek, all sort of Neighbors, all sort of, comedies, R-rated comedies, and he had never done any animation in his life. Nick's process, to have a story team, typically we'll take script pages. We'll give them to a story artist in sort of sections, right? Story artists will draw up what they think that the staging and the action should be from that. Then we'll put that together in editorial. The director reviews story, reviews editorial, and takes a look. Well, with Nick, he wouldn't hand off a script page to story people. And he said, nah, this isn't really what I want. And I said, well, let's just try it. So we gave script pages to story artists. The story artists would try their traditional sort of ideas based on their experience. Nick would come and say, it's nothing like what I want. And I was super stumped as a producer. It's like, I mean, I don't know if I know how to produce this guy, right? And even talking to the studio execs at Warner Brothers, Chris DeFaria, who's now head of DreamWorks, I was like, I don't know if I can make a movie with him. I know I'm committed to it, like I told you guys before, but this is going to be super rough. So what we decided is we decided to go into recording. And what was super obvious is the way Nick does his movies, despite the fact he writes a full draft, he completely makes the movie in the recording studio. And we got professional actors that weren't the final actors. They're professional comedic actors. They would come in, and we would work 4 or 5 pages. We would work over 3 or 4 hours. And Nick would keep throwing out different ideas with the actors. They would stay within the outlines and the bounds of the scene, but it would be 100% different than what we went in with. And when we came out, we would go into editorial with all the audio, and we would make the scene in editorial with just radio play. We call that radio play, just cutting the audio and the takes together. Then it would go to the story team, and the story team would treat that like script pages. Now they would do the story process based on what Nick did in a recording session, and when he saw the panels, he would know how to react to them. So we had to completely, change the process entirely from the way we traditionally worked in order to make Nick successful as a director on that movie. Now, every director has strength. Those are pretty big surprises for me along the way in that movie. But I had no idea that we'd have to change everything. And you can't imagine the emotional turmoil that the story team went through, feeling like they were completely inadequate for about almost a year because nothing was landing with the director and the movie wasn't going anywhere. But every director has strengths and weaknesses. So one of your jobs is to fill in those gaps if you're getting a movie made, because no director is all things to all people. Brad Bird on Ratatouille, ultimately, the ultimate director on Ratatouille, was by far one of the most talented directors I've ever worked with in my life. He is as close as I've ever seen as a director that can actually do it all and sees it in his head, and you're sort of fulfilling his vision. The downside, though, is artists don't feel like they're positively affecting the outcome because it's so defined in his head. And if you don't feel activated as an artist, oftentimes you'll pull back from the process, right? Because you're like, what am I doing? I'm just feeling like I'm this guy's hand because he knows what he wants so much. So there was some coaching with Brad just to talk about engage with everybody. See what they're going to bring to that. Maybe it's not perfect in your head. We did a session with Janine Garofalo, the comedian. Now, Janine hates to be directed, and she was the voice of the female chef in Ratatouille. And Brad knew exactly what read. He knows what read he wants from the actors and it drives some of the actors and actresses nuts because he's dying to give them a read, but he knows you're not supposed to, right? So he starts off and he has them read it a couple of times, and you can just watch Brad. He just starts pacing and getting really nervous, like, it's not the read I wanted, it's in my head. And most of the actors will just say, just tell me what you want. Just what's the read? I'll do it your way, it's fine. But Janine never wanted to do it his way, and she got so pissed. And she'd be sitting there going, she's at the microphone, her hands are up, and she's trying to give the read, and Brad would go, and she'd just go, just shut the fuck up. And she would just go through it in her French accent and keep trying, and finally, she would never take a read, never read it the way Brad wanted. And I mean, she was a great character, but it was so funny. The rides home with Brad in the car, he's like, if she would just let me read it for her. Like, he just would get so fired up. But that's a director who's super successful. The guy it's actually where I learned that as a producer, your idea isn't better than the director's, it's just different. So in other words, if I'm writing dialogue, I'm gonna write dialogue the way it feels natural to me and the way it comes from the character that I think the way the character is gonna speak and feel. Early on with Brad's pages, he came on to the movie about halfway through it. It didn't feel like the characters to me, and even as a producer who's done a lot of creative, I wanted to sort of meddle. I wanted to say, man, why don't you try an alt like this or like this? But my dialogue alt is not his dialogue alt, and the way he has a character say something is not the way I would do it. Brad's stuff is phenomenally successful, and so the lesson for me was, it can be done a different way creatively than the way I would do it, and it can be as or more successful than I would do it. It's sort of a tough lesson for many producers to learn. Right now, at each of the studios I've worked with producers that think they're smarter than the director and that they know what needs to happen on a given scene in a given moment more so than the director does. And there is nothing that will more quickly undermine trust in your relationship with the director, undermine trust in your relationship with your crew, than when you start second-guessing your director, to the extent that you're expressing that to artists, and then they start to feel a lack of confidence in the director and a lack of unity behind the director's vision, and now you start to actually lose the crew. And it's not that you're not truthful to what you think is going to work, but you have to understand the difference between facilitating your vision, somebody else's vision, and facilitating your personal vision. It's your job there's one director, is to pull that movie out of their heart. If they can't find it, you pull it out of their heart and soul and find it for them. Because they have it. Every human has it. We tell archetypal stories that are meant to affect people. So that's what we do. Sorry, I get awfully wound up about this stuff. So again, protect the story. Protect the surprising performance. Allow for it. Demand there be room for the surprising artistic performance, whether it's from an animator, from a story person, from somebody in the booth, so that when it happens, you are flexible and lithe, and you feel it, and you embrace it, and you bring it into your movie. And also recognize and protect a great artistic. Sometimes there's a great artistic decision that is being made on the crew, and a director may just not be feeling it or seeing it yet. There's a way that you have to recognize it. You preserve it. Sometimes in animation, you just wait. It might have been the right answer, but it wasn't the right time for that answer. It might be 6 months later, 8 months later, and then it's like, boop, here comes that great idea again. Guess what? The director wasn't ready for it. The story wasn't ready for it, but now it is. And it pops back. And if it's right, it will be in the movie. Whoa. Well, am I going the wrong way? All right. Build trust everywhere. All the initial relationships that you analyze, build trust everywhere with everyone. It's all you have. It's really all you have. You build trust by being honest. Every relationship matters. Every relationship matters. Whether somebody is just bringing water into a room for a meeting, whether somebody is just driving you to a session, whether or not it's somebody's cousin who's the relative of a studio exec that's sitting in on a meeting, Everybody matters on it, and everybody should be respected, and you'd be surprised how many people have great artistic decisions if you just sort of give them the space to, and place for it. Creative failure is an objective process. When we put our movies up, if I put up the reels right now for Dragon 3 and you guys watch them, you'd say, close. But it's not good. There's areas of it that are still failing. We're in the process, right? So creativity at the end of the day it feels like it's so subjective. How can you manage it? How can you relate to it? Well, if we put it up and we watch it with an audience and they don't respond, it's failure. And so you try to do it better. What are the components that conspire to evoke emotion, to evoke a laugh, to evoke a response? So it's, at the end of the day, creative is it's an objective process, and the failure of it is as well. And that is sort of the beauty of it. So that's what I was going to talk about. That's it. And I just wanted to take questions and from everybody. And the way that Scott and I talked about is try to just put something out, and then let's all sort of interact to the extent that we can. So don't be shy. Yeah.
Let's say the director has 4 different things that he likes, but he can't really choose which one to go for, and you're sort of running out of time. How do you persuade him?
Well, in a case like that, so the question was, what if a director's got 4 different ideas and doesn't really know, they're all sort of equal in his mind and they don't know, his or her mind, and they don't know what they want to do first. From my standpoint, if I've got a good relationship with them all, we'll talk about the one that we think is the best decision to try first. And then also, I would probably back up in a situation like that and say, well, what is your movie about? What is your story about? Andrew Stanton at Pixar used to say, you should be able to really say what your movie's about in a sentence. And I mean, there's been movies that I've been on that we've struggled with this. Even Storks was a tough movie to explain in 1 sentence, and I have a feeling that's why it wasn't ultimately successful, because we were we had too many things going on. So I would ask the director to go back and boil it down to, what does this really mean to you? What is the most important thing that you want to tell first? And then we'll start to see if that plays, and then we'll bring in those next ideas. You have to start with something.
Why co-directors? I've always wondered in animation so often. Is it just the sheer volume of decisions that have to get made versus live action?
There's a couple of reasons for co-directors. One is, remember when I said money's conservative? So studios sometimes will say, we're going to put 2 directors on because they don't have confidence in one of the directors to do it by themselves. And they figure that one of the directors will sort of rise up and he'll be the obvious sort of the leader of that. It's sort of directing by antagonism in some way. I don't think that's a great reason to do it. There's rare occasions like Chris Miller and Phil Lord that they want to work together. They sort of complete each other's sentences. They have a lot of respect. But that's more like 2 directors that want to work together. Another case, we ended up having a co-director on Storks. Doug Sweetland was somebody who had never directed a feature film before. Nick Stoller had directed a feature film, but only in live action. So in that case, Nick was going to be responsible for the story and sort of putting the whole movie together as a piece, because that was where Doug didn't have a lot of experience. But Doug knew animation cold, so he was going to be directing all the animation in the movie. So that was a movie where we had a co-director by sort of functionality. We had sort of gaps in experience, and we were going to align those 2, and they were willing to be aligned together. But honestly, in that movie, Doug had never done lighting before. So I ended up directing all the lighting because I had directed lighting before. So that's a case where a producer had to step in on an area where a director didn't have experience, and he was comfortable with me taking the creative lead in that respect.
Same analogy with, except for from live action, with co-director on an animated film, and then DP frequently being 1 camera, 1 lighting.
Right.
It just seems odd, like you say, that not confidence from the studio side. You almost never ever see that in live action.
Right.
Directors, 2 DPs.
I got to say, though, that I think that maybe in animation, co-directors could be a more common occurrence. when I said before, like animation directors, they really have a broad set of creative responsibility. It's really, really tough for them to be great at everything. A lot of times, a director is their background, what they come out of. Do they come out of graphics or art? Do they come out of animation? Do they come out of story? Typically, they come out of those worlds. Well, a guy that comes out of story doesn't really know the world of how to tell an animator what to do on a given shot. We have animation supervisors, so they might rely on them. But in some cases, I think co-directors might be really good. One to concentrate on the story and the editorial, and the other one to concentrate on the quote and the animation and the lighting, and that's more familiar with production, depending on where they are in their careers. But if they're arbitrarily assigned together by the studio early on, that's usually trouble. That's usually a project I won't sign up for. You were next, and we'll go.
So you talked a bit about your experience being primarily feature films funded by the studios, but the opposite of that as well. Like, do you have experience with television and animated series there, and how is that different? That process, how is that funded? How is that director or producer relationship different?
You know, I haven't done television animation. I've done private animated 2D projects. I did a project for the San Francisco Giants year before last, where we did about 7 minutes of animation for inside the stadium ballpark, all original ideas, all original characters. I've done work with clients, social media clients, one of which I can't talk about right now, but it's in process. I've produced probably about 300 commercials, and I've been involved in visual effects on about 45 or 50 different movies. So I sort of know how those work. I don't know the economics of television animation. I don't really know well. What I do know is that typically they're smaller crews, more people do more things, you work faster and you work cheaper.
So from your experience then, as just director and producer, just that part of it, for the series, when you do multiple commercials of the same series or multiple films of the same series, how is that relationship different from just doing one film?
You know, they're as different as you can possibly imagine. The whole quest in a feature film is really trying the perfect 90-minute story, 3-act classic 90-minute story. For a commercial, you can boil it down to, like, really, what's the point of the commercial? Usually there's one joke, one turn, one idea. In a series, you're probably trying to set up characters that can go through a series of events. So you're looking at an episodic way that you can put them through different events that are going to expand somebody's understanding of that character. So when you're doing short stuff, I think it's entirely different. You're not really trying to take them through a long arc. You don't have time to set up a long arc. The luxury of a movie is when you leave a movie, you know who my character is because you spent 90 minutes with my character. In a commercial, it's usually a quick hit. So typically, you have to be a little bit more contemporaneous. It's a quicker joke. It's maybe a broader laugh. It's a broader emotion. I'll go with you and then you, sorry.
So recently I've heard a saying that goes something like the producer's job is to save the money and the director's job is to actually spend the money. So it kind of goes like there's a natural tension between the two. So I was just curious if you have any advice for maybe up-and-coming directors of kind of alleviating that tension or avoiding it at all.
If there's tension over that, you've got the wrong producer. I think if everybody in this room went in producing, the business would be in a better place in the future. More people who have an artistic background should get into producing. My background's entirely artistic. I was a acting major, theater major, voice minor, dancer, that eventually got into organizing projects because that's just what I like to do. If there's tension with the director over spending money, I think that you have somebody's being super immature or not very communicative about the process. It's a foregone conclusion there's a limited budget. There's a foregone conclusion that there's limited time. What you do within that constraint is a decision you make together. If a director, for me, I need to know when I'm directing, where am I spending my money? If the producer doesn't tell me where I'm spending it, then I'm going to get surprised. Somebody's going to come up and say, well, you're out of money. But most directors that I've worked with, they're super responsible about that. Certainly when you have the conversation that if you get too caught up in this and I let you spin on that for a month and now suddenly you can't spin on something else that's going to be important to you downstream, then that's going to be a problem. Every director I've worked with understands that. There was one thing in Ratatouille, though. So have you guys seen the movie? So you know where he goes down the sewer in the beginning? So early on in the process with Brad, he said, all right, so I wanted to go down in the sewer, and I want a first-person camera, and I want bubbles, and and so I was like, that's great, but it's about 25 shots, and it's going to cost us a lot of money to design it, make it happen, effects, all those things. And he said, no, you don't understand. You're not going to let me spend that. You're going to want to spend that money. And I said, it's not that I don't want to spend the money. I need to make sure that it's absolutely essential to the story before we spend it. So we agreed to park it. To this day, Brad likes to say that I wanted to kill that sequence, and I didn't want to spend the money, and I wouldn't let him spend the money, and he was right, and son of a... But in fact, I think we waited because it was necessary. And what I came to understand, we came to understand, is that if he didn't struggle through that whole process in the sewer, you would never really feel that he would go through that transformation and that change and that desperation. So Brad was right, which he'll tell you very readily, but there wasn't necessarily tension. It was just like, let's wait. And he agreed to wait.
Was it you at Pixar, following on that point, was it you at Pixar that did, there's a story about a producer-director relationship about
Finite money and like separate jars per department with like pencils in them or something. They said, well, if you want to spend this pencil here, I'm going to take you got to take it from somewhere else.
It sounds very John Walker and Brad Bird-like. Yeah. No, that wouldn't, I wouldn't be that tangible about it. Yeah. Sorry, you've been waiting.
Yeah. You have a very extensive background for animated feature films, and we've had a session with Scott Ross before that explained how in his years budget for films have exponentially increased almost from the tens of millions of the 90s, 80s to the almost 200 millions of the now. And from a producer standpoint, how has that transformed your role? Has that increased the hats that you have to wear within the production, or maybe decreased that you compartmentalize them more?
So is your question with larger budgets, has that changed my role?
Do you have to be more conservative because of this in your role as a producer, or is it just a money decision thing?
I don't know. I have an odd relationship with money. I try to forget about it when we're making the movie. We make an assessment. We do pretty early on. We know what the budget's going to be, and we know roughly how much time is going to be spent on all the different departments and so forth. So I sort of try to forget about it. And it doesn't really come up in conversation. I feel a great responsibility to, as soon as I get a budget, I try not to ask for more money. And I try to make sure in my initial budget that I've got some contingency so that I can be a little bit flexible with the creative decisions along the way. So on a bigger budget, there's more scrutiny, and there's a lot more nervousness on the part of the studio. But it does take a little bit more patience in their involvement in the process, because they have a right to be super involved. So I see there's a little bit more time spent in making sure that they're comfortable with how things are going, that the movie's going to be really good, even though we're going through big problems along the way. You do end up having a larger voice in the studio in a weird way. If I make an animated movie, let's say from $70 to $160 million, that's a really large part of their yearly budget for a movie, and it's important in the family space. So you get a larger voice in the studio executive conversations. But I've been offered many executive jobs, and I've never taken them because I love the visceral process of making a movie and making an artistic process. So, but you get a slightly larger voice, I think, in what's happening in the studio in that year. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
You mentioned the idea moments ago of seeing more creatives becoming producer. How do you envision a creative type doing that transition? As I imagine that would be a full skill set to acquire to be effective.
Well, yeah, that's true, but let's assume for a second that anybody has to acquire a new skill set to become a producer. Let's just say let's take that as a grand assumption. I'd rather have somebody who came up through who learned art in some way, shape, or form, was an artist, and then took on that skill set, Because when you're making a movie, I spend 90% of my time looking at creative product. And unless you've been through the pain of that, like as a dancer, in my career as a dancer, you know, I was one of those little kids that could make tips at a restaurant, just going around showing off, you know, and somebody throw you a quarter, right? And then I decided I'd minor in dance. And so I learned all the technique of it, right? But then you have to break it all down. I had to learn ballet. I had to learn modern dance, all these different things. And then for a while, I was just a terrible kind of, I knew the technique of it, but I wasn't a dancer. I was just sort of doing the technique of dance, you know? And then I went and I got through the technical process and I started to become a dancer again. Like the same little heart and soul of mine that wanted to dance as a child, I mastered the technique, and then I could start to really perform. And then people are like, wow, that was a beautiful dance performance. And the same thing happens if you're going to master singing, or the same thing happens if you're going to master animation. Because I've been through that process as a dancer and a singer and everything else as a director, when somebody's struggling, I can understand where they are, and I can see if they're actually doing good art yet. So I want an artist to go into producing so that when those, right, because the contrast is this. There's too many people that are coming up as production management people that have never done a lick of art in their lives. And that to me is like, how in the world do you really know how to manage something if you've never made something, if you don't understand what the struggle is, if you don't understand how to motivate somebody when their creative well is dry, or when they're totally flowing and you're like, let's nail that, let's give them great stuff for the next 6 weeks, they have it. So if you don't understand where they are, then you can't help them. And really, you know, I guess what I didn't put up here is producing, you're just helping people, right? You're helping them find their trust in themselves, finding their art, and finding their love, and letting them perform. So I want artists to go into producing and stop people that go in, I started as a PA, and then I went to become a coordinator, and they've never done anything in their lives. So if you are an artist that have an inkling that putting together a project is interesting to you, then do that. Because this is what I'm trying to cultivate now at DreamWorks, and what I'm trying to cultivate in our business of animation are artists that know the process, so you make something great. Films and animation have been way too mundane over the last 10 years. For me, they're not something that I don't feel a lot of joy in them, whether emotional joy or drama or whatever. And I think it's become sort of derivative of, this is how you make a story. This is how a story team does it. This is what a 3-act structure looks like. It was well managed, and we got in budget and on time. Congratulations, your movie didn't move anybody. So, you know, I want artists, and we'll worry about the rest later. Other questions? Yeah.
There seems to be an unfortunate trend recently with firing directors.
Well, with Star Wars, obviously, the most recent one, but Pixar too, the last, 2 or 3 directors.
There are about 9 directors at Pixar that got fired over the years.
And can you just maybe talk about that?
Sure. I was one of them.
Because you really double, triple down on it here to say, director 100%, even if he's wrong, director 100%. And that would lead one to the conclusion that, well, obviously a director can never be fired because it's a director's room, especially what Pixar used to be anyway. We're saying, it's a director.
A director can still fail, but you have to be sure that the director is completely exhausted every creative solution they have in their heart and their soul. And if they're tapped out and the movie doesn't work, then you have to change directors. But that's different than never allowing the director to exhaust his creative heart and soul and his solution to what this archetypal story is all about, and then replacing them because you think you have a better idea. And in many instances that I've seen at Pixar and other places, the director starts getting second-guessed after one bad screening, as opposed to going back to the director and saying, we trusted you for some reason. So we want to remind ourselves what that reason is. We want you to remember what that reason is. What is this movie? Like, really, you have to, most directors that get assigned a movie, there's a great movie in their heart and soul. You have to help them find it. The minute you step back from that and you stop to trust them and you start to say, try on this idea. You can't direct somebody else's idea. The directors that I know, whether they picked up a script and they ran with it, they made it their own. And if you start telling the director what they need to do creatively and how to direct, then you're not getting that director's vision. You're getting him executing group think. And that's one of the conservative things that happens at some of the big studios, is you start to say, gosh, that was kind of a failure, that last one. Why don't you try this? And when that comes from the head of the studio, why don't you try this? The director has to try that. And now the director's making their movie. It's a fine line. But a lot of times, because there's so much money spent on these, the director won't be trusted anymore.
Is it happening more now, or is it just a perception?
You know, I have to say that what I worry about are studio executives that want to make a quick trigger decision on a director. Provided you've got the right director up front on the movie, and you've made that analysis going in, then typically that director can finish the movie. Or you can give them the right kind of help. A director may have written the movie himself, and maybe they need help with the structure of it because it fell apart. Doesn't mean they don't direct anymore. The director's vision is their heart and soul. It's the only thing we rely on. A sculptor, can you imagine everybody trying to sculpt together? And it's like, I don't know. So I think it's 100% that. Once they've exhausted their heart and soul, they'll typically say, I can't do it. And now you move on.
I wonder if there's a relationship with the previous question about with the budgets. Budgets have exploded and gotten so high. Maybe the executives are more...
Totally. I'm trying not to be super critical of some folks that I know at some of the big studios, because I just don't think it's fair all the time, because there's a lot of nuance to it. But it's safe to say that at Pixar, when you've gone through 8 or 9 first-time directors and you've taken them off movies, then you've lost your way and your commitment to building a director truly the way the original directors there were built. Yes. Would you?
Yeah, I could actually name names because I don't care. So what we've seen is we've seen companies like Pixar, who the key creative person is also the head of the studio, is also the power that be, and therefore it's very difficult for him to allow other people to make decisions, right? So John Lasseter is the end-all and be-all of Pixar and now Disney feature animation, and so as a result, it's very difficult for him to be able to say, okay, Brenda, you can do it, run with it, here you go, here's jet fuel, because he's the final decision maker creatively. Similarly with Kathy at Lucasfilm, she's got this giant thing that she has to carry, which is this legacy of Star Wars. And fortunately or unfortunately, most directors that come to do Star Wars are directors, and they actually want to have their imprint on this new Star Wars. Oftentimes, their imprint is not the imprint of what George Lucas would like you to have, and Kathy's carrying the torch of George Lucas, and so therefore you get fired. So it's really sometimes when you have the creative head of a studio working with other directors, it becomes very difficult for that creative head to allow the directors to do what they do. Now, when you go to traditional motion picture studios, the head of production, like let's say Walter Parks when he used to be at DreamWorks, he had his say, but he had enough skill set and knowledge and capability to be able to say, well, you're the director, right? So I've seen that happen a lot. And so I think we see a lot of the firings of directors now as a result of the person who's in charge of the project hires a director to satisfy their vision.
And I think that that's one of the reasons why animated movies are not as interesting as they used to be. I think it's not just a proliferation of animation in that space. It's people getting second-guessed, so you get sort of a homogenized version of a movie, which moves nobody. And to be mildly entertaining is just fucking offensive. Sorry.
So going from that point, I mean, the thing that would rejuvenate the animation industry, so to speak, would be more first-time directors. And if more first-time directors, I imagine everyone here would want to direct a film or have something made. And if they want to go about getting their film made, how do they get the funding? How do they get a producer in the first place? Is it always go to a studio?
It's not always go to a studio, but it's the easiest way to get a big movie made that's got a lot of money behind it. So a lot of times, the people that come to direct most quickly are ones that go into the story department. Less commonly come out of the animation department. Sometimes in some of the studios now, like at a Warner Brothers, they'll get involved in development. They'll send an idea into the executives there, and they might get something landed, or there'll be a writer. So you write a script, send the script in, the script gets a little bit of attention, and then you get trusted as a creative that knows something about the process. There's some tough barriers to get to those people for them to read your stuff. But if you've got something that's hot and it's good, then they will probably take a look at it. If you can write a script that's hot and good, I'll bet you can make a short film that's hot and good too, if you're a good director. Make the short film for little as money as possible, whether it's live action, this, that, or the other. If you make a hot short film and you can get it out into a festival or something like that, you won't have a problem getting in a studio to talk. They'll want to talk to you as opposed to you wanting to talk to them. So my advice would be to either get involved in the studio at a relatively high level as a story artist or as an animator or something, or make a piece of entertainment that you can afford to make with a group you can afford to make it with. And when that is hot and gets distributed, then you'll be the one that has some leverage in going in, and then you'll get people to listen to. Most studio executives, they're just looking to exploit somebody who's talented. Most people think they're more talented than they are. I mean, my big thing is, we all can't, I think Scott said last night, you can't be, what was your analogy? You can't be...
I can't be a power forward.
Right. My thing is, I can't be a professional golfer, right? I wish I could be, but I'm just not good enough. But if I love golf, let's just pretend, like if I love my industry, I can go into the golf industry and I can be happy every day because I'm working in golf. Maybe I design golf shirts. Maybe I write golf journalism. Maybe I start a golf, whatever it is. Maybe I design a club. But I'm in the golf industry, even though I can't play on the pro tour. So in this business, if you're dedicated to entertainment, my dream is to walk in an airport and have everybody looking down at their phone like we all do. I should probably go into cervical reconstruction, and have everybody laughing at the same time because there's something I put on your phone that made you laugh and everybody was tuned into it. That's like my big, far out goal in my life. So if you want to be in this industry, it's like you're born to entertain. You're born to want to affect people. Then find your talent in it. It may not be you're a director, but you might be a great lighter on a live action set. You might be a great animator. You might be a great modeler. If you find out, remember who you were as a kid. We don't stray far from who we are. When I do reviews with people on the cruise and stuff like that, most of the time for me, I'm like, have you ever heard you're stubborn? Has your mother ever told you were stubborn? Had your friends growing up tell you were stubborn? Maybe a teacher? Yeah. Well, guess what? You're stubborn. So now let's talk about your performance. Like, people are who they are, right? But your talent is your talent. So what you loved, you probably have some aspect of that business you can do and find it. Like for me, it happened to be producing and a little bit of directing. But I didn't think it was going to be. I thought it was going to be Gene Kelly. I was hoping right now to be giving a master class to you guys on Here We Go, but you wouldn't want to see that, yeah. Questions? Anything else? We good? All right, well, I'll hang around for a while. If anybody has any questions, I'm here for the week. Happy to have coffee. Thanks.